Welcome back to the virtual hangar. Today I'm going to show you how to make this lovely stitch sampler. Your kit will include 4 colors of embroidery thread or embroidery floss. You might have different colors than the colors that I have here. 1 9-inch square of plain cotton fabric. 1 6-inch embroidery hoop. 1 embroidery needle, that's a little bit bigger than a regular sewing needle. And 1 paper pattern that we are going to use for our stitches. You will also need a pencil, any pencil will do, and a pair of sharp scissors. Okay, to get started, we're going to take our paper pattern and lay it flat on a surface, and then take our fabric and lay it right on top. If you have an iron and can iron the fabric, that would probably help you. I didn't do it, and the fabric will get stretched wrinkle-free on the hoop, but it would make this part a little bit easier. But we're just going to take our pencil and trace our pattern exactly as it is on the paper onto the fabric. This takes a little bit of time. Just try and be as accurate as you can. If you have a ruler, that might help since this pattern has a lot of straight lines. But the more accurately you can copy this pattern onto the fabric with your pencil, the more accurate you will be when you go to stitch it. So now that our fabric has our pattern on it in the pencil, we are going to put it on the embroidery hoop. So to do that, you have to unscrew the outside of the hoop from the inside of the hoop. The hoop is made up of 2 rings, and it uses the tension on this little knob here to pin the fabric in between the 2 hoops. So we take the inner hoop, lay our fabric on top of it, about center with the pattern, as centered as you can make it, and then lay our second hoop on top of that. You might have to play with the tension on the knob to make sure it actually will fit on top of it with the fabric. Then once it's pretty much centered, you're going to tighten the tension on the knob by screwing it in a clockwise motion until our fabric is tight and centered on the hoop. Now you can see these numbers on our pattern here. Those refer to the type of stitch that each line represents. We're going to start from the middle, work out the right, and then work out the left. So to start with, we are going to cut our thread and thread our needle. We're going to pretty much do this in the same fashion for every type of stitch. You want to cut a piece of thread that's at least twice the length of the line that you're working on the pattern. And then once you cut it, we are going to thread our needle, which can take any amount of time. If you've never threaded a needle before, the easiest way to do that is to actually hold the needle still and try and push the thread through the needle. It helps sometimes if you lick the end of the thread, get it a little bit wet. That helps bind the different threads together. And then once our thread is pulled through the eye of the needle, we're going to leave a little bit of a tail, about 1 inch or 2 in length, which is why it's important to have the thread be twice as long as whatever line you're working, because you do need to have that tail. And then we're just going to tie a simple overhand knot, which is not exactly overhand since it's so little, but you make just a regular knot pretty close to the end of your thread. I usually leave about 1 centimeter, and then I always do a double knot, so I make a second knot that ends up being right on top of the first knot I made, just so the knot is extra thick so we don't accidentally pull it through the fabric when we're trying to sew our embroidery stitches. So that's how we prep our needles. So now let's start with the first stitch. The first stitch is called a running stitch, and it's going to be this middle line on our pattern. And what you do is start from the back, and at the bottom of the first line you drew, push the needle through all the way to the other side of the fabric, pull till you just taut on the knot there that you made, and then at the other end of the line we are just pushing our needle straight down through the fabric so that we just make kind of a little dash. When the running stitch is complete, it'll make a dashed line just like the dashed line on our pattern. So when we're pulling our embroidery thread through the fabric, you want to make sure you're not pulling it so tight that it wrinkles the fabric, but it is tight enough that the thread is taut. You can see better here on the close-up. I start at the bottom of the dash and then push my needle back through at the top of each dash. So it leaves about an equal space based on how we drew the pattern between our stitches and the place where there's no stitches. This is the basic of all sewing, just going up through the fabric and back down through the fabric. So when we get to the end of our line, we're going to do our last stitch here, and then once we've pulled it relatively taut, we're going to flip over to the back side, make sure that our tension is good, and then I don't unthread my needle. I leave the needle on and use it to help me tie this knot. Just a simple knot. And I want to try and get it as close to the fabric as possible because that's going to keep our tension that we worked so hard to get nice and even. It'll make sure that the last couple of stitches in our row don't get weird and loose because our knot is too far away from the end of the fabric. And then again, with the needle still on the thread, I will tie a second knot and try and get it just on top of the last knot. I double knot everything because I am always worried that my knots will come out, even though they really shouldn't. And then once you've got your double knot tied, that is when you're going to just trim the extra thread, and that is the back of our running stitch. This is what it looks like on the front when it's done. That's the basis of all sewing. But for embroidery it is called a running stitch. Now we are going to move on to the second kind of embroidery stitch. It's called a back stitch. You want to make sure for sure on this one you've got at least twice the length of the line you're going to work, and go ahead and cut that thread. Prep your needle the exact same way that we prepped the needle for the last stitch. You're going to start about let's see, 3 millimeters I would say. You can see here a little bit better. Start up from the bottom of the line, and then we're going to go back down towards the beginning of the line. And then we're going to push our needle through the fabric about that same distance from where the thread comes up through the fabric. That makes our first, it's kind of like a running stitch but backwards. That makes our first stitch in the back stitch. And that's why they call it the back stitch. And again, we're working hard to make our tension just nice and taut, but not so much that it crinkles the fabric in any way. Then we are going to take our needle and put it in the same hole as the top of the previous stitch. And again, go about 3 millimeters above the last stitch and pull taut. You can see a little bit better here as I continue the line how it makes a straight line. You could use this same method to make a curve. This is how you're going to make any sort of line work that you would do in your embroidery, is going to use the backhand stitch. So when we get to the end here, at the end of our line, you can see it stops just a little bit below the top of the line, and then we're going to again tie the double knot and then trim the extra. So the back looks pretty much just like the front. That's the backhand stitch. The next stitch is the cross stitch, and you can see here I made my thread about 4 times the length of the line. We're going to start in the bottom left hand corner, pull your thread up through the fabric to the front side. Going to go to the top right hand corner and push the needle through to the back side of the fabric. Then we're going to start in the bottom right hand corner at the bottom of our line, and we're cheating a little bit here to get that heart shape. And then we're going to go pull our needle through to the upper left hand corner, pull our needle to the back side of the fabric. And that makes the cross stitch. And again, you want your tension to just be taut, not so much that it wrinkles the fabric. The fabric should still be tight in the hoop. So we do bottom left to top right, and then we go again bottom right to the top left. And if you do it in this pattern on each X, the back side of our stitches will look nice and clean, and all of your X's will look the same. Cross stitch is an entire another field of embroidery. It's kind of like a subset of regular embroidery, where you make very, very small crosses, and then each cross in each color can make a pattern. It's almost like pixel art. It can be very cool, and it's really easy to develop your own patterns to make cross stitching, but I like these big X's too in the way they end up looking in the final project. So again, we're cheating that kind of top one. And we get to the back side and we're going to tie that nice double knot and then just trim our thread. That is what if you follow the pattern, that is what the nice back side of the cross stitches will look like, and then the front. So the next stitch is the threaded running stitch. So we're going to make a running stitch just like we did for stitch number 1, the regular running stitch. In one color, you're going to make the running stitch and then tie it off and trim the thread on the back. And then we are going to take a second color and start just to the right of the first running stitch in our line. Come up through the front of the fabric. You can see my needle come through the fabric there. Once we've pulled it taut, you'll want about twice the length of the line for this second color. Use your needle to just kind of tuck under the running stitch you made, but not go through the fabric. We're going to do this entire threaded piece on the front of the fabric, but we are going to run underneath each running stitch. So you take your needle, go through the stitch in one direction, and we're making kind of an S pattern. Once we've threaded through right to left, well, I'm kind of doing it top to bottom, bottom to top, top to bottom, and that makes this kind of rick-rack, wiggly S pattern. And you can see with your needle, you can adjust the tension on each wiggle, I guess is the official term. When you get to the end, you're just going to push your needle back through to the back of the fabric, and then very gently flip your piece over and tie your double knot. You can see how that makes the nice wiggle. I had a little bit of strong tension on my back stitches there, so I've got a little bit of wrinkling in my fabric. But once you get to the back, just double knot and trim, and that is the threaded running stitch. The fifth stitch that we're going to do is the chain stitch, and you can see I've got these 3 holes here that I made to kind of help you see. So we're going to go through the first hole, pull our thread to the side, and go back directly in the same hole that we just made with our needle. So we're only working in this first hole, and we're making a loop. So don't pull your thread all the way back through. Instead, push your needle through the second hole about 3 millimeters up. You won't have holes, but it'll be about 3 millimeters up from where you first pushed your needle through the fabric. And it makes kind of a chained loop. So we go back through the same hole we just came through, keep our loop, and push our needle up about 3 millimeters up from where we just were on the line. And that makes our chain stitch. So I'm going to show you one more. Back through the hole we just made with our thread and back up to kind of catch the loop about 3 millimeters from the hole we just made. There's another way that you can do this once you get more comfortable, where you keep the same pattern of holes, but you, as you can see here, kind of just leave your needle flat and push through the 2 holes at the same time. And that can be a little bit easier for the chain stitch, but it's a little bit more difficult overall. So to finish, once we've caught our last loop, we're just going to take our needle and push it just above on the outside of the loop, the hole we just made. And that kind of just tucks the last loop and makes it stay. Pull our needle through to the back side of the fabric, just like that. And then do the same method, tie, double knot as close to the fabric as you can, and then trim. The fern stitch is going to follow these 3 lines. We're going to start at the bottom of our lines and go to the top of the middle line. Then we're going to go to the top of the left-hand line, pull our needle through to the front side of the fabric, and then push it back down in the same hole we made at the bottom of the previous line. Pull it tight. Then we're going to go to the top of the line on the right side, pull our needle through to the front of the fabric, and then push it through the same hole at the bottom of the previous stitch we just made. Now when we go to start the next stitch, we go to the bottom of the middle line. The top of the line should be in that same hole of the last hole we made in the previous stitch, so all of your fern stitches will connect. So we go bottom to top middle, top left to bottom middle, and then we go top right to bottom middle, and that's the fern stitch. Now once you've finished working the row in that same exact way, the very last stitch is just a simple backhand stitch. Go to the bottom and then go to the top middle, but it's the only line in the stitch, and that makes the stem for our fern. Then when we tie in the back, we just do a double knot and then trim the thread. You'll probably need a thread that's about 4 times the length of that line. Same for this one. Stitch number 7, the star stitch. Prep your needle with a thread that's about 4 times the length of the line, and then we're going to go and make a simple cross stitch. Start bottom left, go to the top right, in case you forgot from when we did the cross stitch earlier. Then go to the bottom right, pull through to the front of the fabric, and go back down into the top left. That starts our star stitch with a cross, and then we're going to make another cross stitch on top of it, turned at a 45-degree angle. So we are going to go from the right hand side across to the left hand side, and then once we've pulled our needle through to the back of the fabric, we're going to go from the bottom of the stitch to the top of the stitch. As long as you follow the lines that you drew when you copied the pattern, you should have nice even star stitches all the way up the line of star stitches. So again, bottom left, top right, bottom right, top left, right to left, and then bottom to top, and then continue all the way through the rest of the row. So there are a lot of stitches on this project that I didn't do on camera, but they are repeats of the stitches that I had already showed you. So like the lines in between the star stitch and the fern stitch, they're marked with a number 2 on your pattern, so you just make those lines with the back stitch like I showed you, the number 2. When we finish the star stitch, we're going to tie a double knot on the back of our fabric, and then go ahead and trim that thread. Now, to finish your project, there's a couple different ways we could do it. You could just leave your project as is and take it out of the hoop and put it in a nice picture frame. But if you want to finish your project and leave it on the hoop and hang it in the hoop, all you do is take your scissors and trim about 1 centimeter all the way around, get rid of all the excess fabric. I leave about 1 inch to 1 centimeter. I know I switch between inches and centimeters, and that doesn't make any sense, but that's how my brain works. So I leave about 1 centimeter. Then you want to cut a piece of thread that's at least as long as the circumference of your hoop, all the way around the hoop. Thread your needle, and there's no need to tie the double knot at the end of the thread on this one. We're just going to do a simple running stitch all the way around the edge of our fabric outside of the hoop. So just go up and back through the fabric all the way around. You're just trying to get the thread distributed, I guess, through the fabric, because what we're going to do is gather all the fabric on the back side. So we're just doing a running stitch all the way around the outside of the hoop, and then take our 2 long ends of thread, pull them tight, and then tie them in a double knot. So once we've got our running stitch finished, we're going to take our 2 ends of thread, pull them really tight, gather all the fabric to the back side of the thread, and then tie a double knot. And this is a pretty standard way of finishing an embroidery piece if you want to display it on the hoop. Again, you don't have to. You could cut, you could just take the square of fabric outside of the hoop and then put it in a frame. But there is our finished project. Feel free to pause, rewind, jump around this video. That'll really help you get it done. One last time, here is our project. I would love to see what you guys make. Please tag us on social media, and I will see you next time.